Welcome to a new episode of Whiplash Agile, where we focus on the failures that are necessary to be successful on an Agile journey. Because there are always valuable lessons to be learned from someone else's struggles and stumbles. I'm Jeff Anderson, your host and CEO of Agile by Design. So welcome everybody to my next episode of Whiplash Agile. I'm really excited actually to introduce my next guest. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I've worked with, how long have we worked together, Greg? 6 years, 7 years?
It's somewhere in that range, 6 to 7 years for sure.
So Greg has been one of my first clients as an independent consultancy as part of Agile by Design. I think when we were 2 people or something. He's also been one of our longest clients, and we've had the pleasure of watching Greg have I'll call it like a leadership position in a critical but underserved sort of area of the business, which was payments way back in, I don't know, the middle of the last decade or sort of. And watching that grow from, a critical but underserved service to watching it scale up to, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times the size in a couple of years, if more, not more. And then watch as, you basically, were asked to take on more responsibilities across the bank to go into kind of really anything to do with global transaction banking across Scotia as a technology leader. And, the one thing that I'd love to see is the way you use sort of human methods, agile techniques, self-organization as a way to kind of pull off that scaling with, I would say, a lot less cuts, bruises, and injuries that you sometimes see in the technology delivery side of the banking world. So with that brief introduction, welcome on board, Greg. It's great to have you here because you have a wealth of real world experience from sort of behind the trenches.
Well, thanks, Jeff. And it's been 6 to 7 years, and it's been a heck of a journey over that time. And I like to think I've grown quite a bit from a leadership perspective in that time. So happy to share some of that.
And I think that's actually one of the first questions I was going to ask you is, if you take back, maybe describe your role a little bit at the beginning of this journey. And I would love you to share with people that are listening how that role has evolved, not only from, obviously a seniority and a scope of responsibility perspective, but how your mindset kind of shifted from going into this to where you are right now.
Yeah, sure. You alluded to it. We started out together. Payments was really in its really underserved in its infancy. It wasn't well appreciated in financial institutions, but it was going to be a big area of investment. So I was brought in, and one of the things that I tried to do working with you and your team was really achieve value quicker. That at the beginning, that's all it was about. It was really about how can we thin slice things, and I didn't know what thin slice meant at the time. So we weren't using that term yet, but really slice things into manageable chunks of work that we could show a benefit earlier by incremental delivery, but then really beat the overall benefit profile of what a business case was. Because, banks, we love business cases. Like we love cost benefit analysis. So breaking it down into chunks, those first couple of things, it was about street cred within the bank. It had allowed us to experiment. It allowed us to grow. So go from 1 or 2 teams doing something probably in the big scheme of things that wasn't that important, thinking back now, but it laid down a framework for the future, especially as we knew that there was this big horizon of investment likely where we were going to have to grow very, very quickly. So that's kind of what it was. I don't even remember how many millions of dollars of investment it was, but it was minor compared to where we are today. Like you're probably close at 20 to 30 fold.
That's what I
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's probably in that sort of range. And I think, it was a great experience. And I really, I didn't, if you fast forward to today, I think about mindset way more than I did at the time. It was more technical practices.
Right.
And it was, it was about ceremonies. It was me showing up for ceremonies, which was really important. Now I barely see a ceremony, but some of that's just because of scale. But it's become more about the mindsets and spending time with individual people on teams on helping them grow. Essentially,
what's the big difference in the mindset that you would say, especially as you thought about this when you started, and like, are there some tangible mindset shifts you could kind of spot and say, oh, wait a minute, like any occurrence that happened where you're like, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah, I think, as a bank, we tended not to integrate product owners into our teams. So there was a big shift that had to change, that we wanted dedicated product people in our teams, embedded in our teams to co-create. I just used some words, co-create and embedded. Those did not exist when we started this in a big way. The concept of travelers, having support teams allocated to you for periods of time to deliver an outcome, not even something we thought about back then, but now we really think about it. At the end of the day, though, probably the most important thing was, if I went into a ceremony, I would always ask, and you probably remember this, I would ask, what's the value of what you're doing?
Yeah.
And if they couldn't answer it was, most importantly, it was a teaching moment.
Yeah.
But it was also should we stop and pivot to something of value? And that was a big part of the practice for probably 2 to 3 years, was as we grew from 1 or 2 teams up to probably 20-ish teams that we had in an ecosystem. So it was a big change. Fast forward that a little further, and I took this practice to our credit card portfolio, another money movement thing. And we had a modernization that was going on. There were probably 500 people involved. I think 35 project managers. Don't quote me on the actual numbers, but it was pretty close. So it was a case of silos. So there were handoffs all over the place. The way we describe it now is that there were a lot of people that were taking the work away instead of coming to the work. That is a massive difference to today from even when we started 6 years ago. So it's a massive difference.
People taking the work away and going off and working on themselves versus coming to a central area to work on it together, basically.
And you just think about the problem that has. If somebody takes the work away, you lose feedback, you lose transparency, you lose the ability to co-create. So they're taking a static thing away, and they're going to throw something over the fence. And 9 times out of 10, that's probably going to miss the mark. Especially if it's a long-running thing, because the market moves, customer experience expectations move. So we had to make some fundamental changes in the way we worked and our mindset about creating value and how we worked as a team.
You mentioned getting street cred before.
Yeah.
What are, like, maybe you won't know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to try to be less specific. You did some specific things that really established street cred. That I think the Agile by designers were like, wow, Greg did what? Maybe some others look for the kind of advice, right? Like, what are some things you did to get kind of street cred?
Yeah, like, at the beginning, especially, it was about taking a business case and breaking it down into chunks and describing the value that we were able to create. And it wasn't about me describing it was the team, most importantly, especially the business product owners were like, wow, this is changing how we can deliver stuff. And they started to change their thinking. So that was one thing. Shop that around the bank a lot. It was interesting because almost every control mechanism you have in a bank, it was speaking a foreign language to them. So there was a lot of times where we had to stop and educate. And it's funny, as a leader, one of the criticisms I had about me early in my career was I would go too fast and I wouldn't bring everybody along. And this was a great exercise for me because this was so different in the way we were approaching software delivery, software development, now called engineering, that we really had to bring the rest of the bank, whether that was sitting down with group heads or the CFO
Yeah.
directly and explaining good and bad of things and how we could avoid the pitfalls of the past by a different way of addressing challenges. So, and optimizing value, quite honestly.
What were some big challenges? Like if there's something that kind of was like thorny and difficult and you'd expect it to, and something that might resonate with others, and how'd you overcome that? I'm sure some people would be interested that are in a similar position as yours.
Well, thorny.
Yeah.
We were terrible at getting direct customer feedback.
Yeah.
So that was a real mindset change to shift us to bringing real customers in. In that, it was a little bit easier in the global transaction banking world because treasurers, they are really open to come and visit. But you bridge that to retail, it's a much harder play to get direct customer feedback that get consistency that will play to a whole bunch of customers. So just a real difficult thing was getting the groups to really embrace customer feedback. We really love to think that we knew everything about our channels and how our customers transacted. So that was a really tough one. And there's an interesting anecdote which may lead us to another area. But I remember when I took over credit cards, I was walking around with a group head, and he asked me what was going on. And there was a group of, I think, 20 to 24 people, and they were trying to break down the customer onboarding journey.
Right. I remember this.
Stickers all over the place.
Yeah.
Stickies all over the place, all different colors. And he said, why does it take so many people? I went, here's the opportunity. We had a different person representing every channel.
Yeah.
Because that's the way the bank operated. People only knew their silo. So getting people and forcing them to break it down together and understand different perspectives it was very thorny. It was very difficult. People didn't want to do it. So if you think about it, we had 24 people to describe one journey.
Right.
Now, was it 2 years later? We have probably a dozen people that can do the whole thing.
Yeah. It's amazing.
And that's a fundamental shift, because all of a sudden you've reduced your key person risk.
Yeah.
Especially in a financial institution like a bank where you've got legacy, and you can break down those barriers of that knowledge gap. So your retirement risk is a lot less.
Right.
And that's really important because, especially as we were breaking down a bunch of journeys, it tended to be the same 10 people. That's not good.
Yeah.
So we had a team of 450 people on our project.
Yeah.
To break down customer journeys, it was always the same 10 people.
Right.
That was a serious thing that we had to overcome. And it's taken us a couple of years, but we broke down that 450 into, I think, 6 or 7 squads, we called them. And you had 10 or 12 people on each of those squads that could truly describe an end-to-end journey for whatever the theme was. And that was, of all the things, that was probably the most difficult to overcome.
And what you're speaking to is that multidisciplinary, cross-functional, but from a customer's perspective, you're talking about not from the internals. You're actually now doing it from the outward-facing perspective.
Yeah, if you think of my portfolio, so I oversee payments and cash management globally. I've got core banking. I've on an interim basis, at least, I'm overseeing all the Canadian banking delivery. That's about 3,000 people that are doing delivery around that. On a bad day, it's probably closer to 4 on a good day if I count everything.
But good days when there's less folks, is what you're saying?
Yeah, good days. Yeah, well, I don't know. It's just a good day is when you're able to count everything, because the nature of a global organization. So, it's really, really important to break down those silos, because if you've got pockets of, think about, just do the math.
Yeah.
300 people, if you have 30 people in a silo, that's 100 silos. How can you get anything done that's really going to resonate with a customer? It's impossible. It really is. So breaking those things down, those silos down, was unbelievably difficult, because people hate change.
Yeah.
And so that was probably, the secret to success is probably breaking down those silos at the end of the day, or, above all of the other stuff. Breaking down those silos really enables the teams to actually prove that this can work.
So, talking about how like breaking down silos is one of the ways I think that, and mindset is one of the ways that your organization has done this differently from some others in, I'll say, the bank, other banks. One of the other things I want to talk about is a lot of FSIs or large enterprises will kind of stand up this centralized change organization, like, the center of excellence, and they'll roll out the standard methods and the standard tools and everyone will adopt. And we didn't do that there. I was wondering if you talked about the difference and why it's important.
Well, my opinion is when you are doing something innovative, if you try and centralize it, you're going to destroy the value right off the bat because you lose context.
Right.
And it becomes more about the repeatable process rather than working directly with teams to co-create. And co-create is not just about the outcome; it's about how they're going to work together. I really in a bank, I hate that the people using Agile, especially big A Agile.
Yeah, big A, yeah.
No one really understands it. So we're looking for agility. We're looking for incrementalism, rather than big A Agile, because every time the big A gets brought up, someone does want to centralize it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where street cred came in for me, that I was able to avoid it. We ran essentially a private enterprise off to the side. Luckily, it was in a small area of the bank in the beginning, so it was manageable. The risk was fairly low from an all bank perspective. Yeah. There was a degree of trust with me and some of my peers, but we had to build more trust to be able to scale it to get to where we are today. So, where am I today? We've got 70 individual teams running across, I think, probably 14 or 15 ecosystems at this point.
Amazing.
So that's just my world within the bank. Sure, there's other pockets that are doing similar things, but slightly different. And I would say that nobody has embraced mindset yet. They probably haven't come across that quite yet. So they will at some point. But yeah.
So that's interesting. You've described sort of going from more ceremony-based to, getting into the more mindset based and more simplicity or kind of based. What are some of the other, like, if you think of the beginning of the journey till now, what are some other like major milestones or turning points where you saw that you had to do like an organizational shift, whether it was evolutionary or top down and planned, basically?
Yeah, I think when we talked quite a bit about the beginning. There's like the squishy middle, where we went to like from 2 to 10.
Right.
And they were colliding all over the place. So we learned like
the teams, right?
Yeah, you needed to have those ceremonies that were just the team leadership that was coming together, that were talking about risks, dependencies, just how they could impact each other because they were playing in the same ecosystem. So we really learned that ecosystem view of Agile,
right?
Which was, it was a discovery for us. For us, it was completely a new experience because we'd just grown up thinking, we can just do this and we can keep to ourselves. And all of a sudden we learned, holy crud, we can impact each other, and mostly in a negative way. So we learned a big lesson when we started to have some collisions and we started missing a couple dates.
Yeah.
Because they just weren't talking. So I learned that collaboration just wasn't within the Agile teams themselves.
Right.
It was about that whole ecosystem. Really important lesson for me, quite honestly. And if you remember, I spent my interaction model with the teams really shifted to that engagement with all the team leaders. It enabled me to coach a lot more, quite honestly, because we had 20 people all hearing the same message, and it was I wasn't aware of everything that was going on at that point. When you get that many teams, you don't know the intricacies. So you're really asking very generalized questions, which was probably good for me.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, because it got me out of the what and more about just thinking about how and how we performed as teams. So that was a big transition point. Then we went more all bank with expanded portfolio. So I was given more because we wanted to scale this because it was proving its worth. And then I had to watch for the danger of too much whip.
Yeah.
So in myself, in our coaches, in a lot of cases, in our team leaders. We couldn't overload them with all these extra ceremonies. We were almost creating our own overhead at a certain point. So we had to be very conscious of that. So big lesson learned is that you have to have real purpose.
Yeah.
For ceremonies. So I became way less about ceremonies.
Yeah.
And having purposeful conversations.
Amazing.
In the
like
teams.
That. So kind of like from teams to ecosystems to purposeful and very, very context specific. That's amazing.
Yeah.
There's been recent activity in Scotiabank to take some of the stuff you've done within global transaction banking and see if you can incorporate into other parts of the bank. What's that journey been like, working with your peers and acting as you kind of almost without really asking for it, start wearing the mantle for new ways of working and kind of work,
Yeah. And I won't lie to you, it's difficult. And partly because, especially as you get into big organizations, everybody has a different way of doing things, and everybody thinks theirs is the best way. So it's a challenge. So you have to spend quite a bit of time explaining the value proposition.
Yeah.
So that's where street cred comes in. Street cred, proven results really do make a difference. I think the next big thing for me is, we've got a pretty expansive footprint, but up until this year, I would always call us a collection of banks.
Right.
And when you look at the workforce that delivers outcomes, technology-based outcomes, we haven't cracked a decentralized team model yet.
Right.
We have gone with augmented, mainly for cost reasons, where we've augmented teams from our low-cost centers. But we haven't got into the point where we've distributed the work, the outcomes, in a way, and then brought them back together as an ecosystem. It was always in the same building, in the same rooms.
Yeah.
It's now we need to take it further. That's the next big thing for us.
And I think what you're talking to is some of this idea that organizing around value that transcends every group of your banks. So you're not talking about cross-functional teams. It's almost cross-line of business, cross-organizational. And how do you organize around that? Is that some of the things you're getting at here?
I think of it a little bit differently. I'm going to use a word that you're aware of. I think of it as domains.
Got it.
We run X number of banks in all of our jurisdictions. So we've got people that understand onboarding really well.
Right.
We've got people that CRM, trading, whatever the case, money movement.
Yeah.
Take a domain. We're not taking full advantage of the knowledge that we have decentralized.
Right.
So I'm trying to get away from a Canada first staffing view.
Yeah.
To let's find the best people in that domain and bring them together and really enable them.
Right.
Because my premise is they haven't really embraced Agile and mindset the way we have. So if we can bring deep knowledge with a real big desire, because quite honestly, people in other countries in our other jurisdictions, they're dying to work on the big key things.
Right.
So I think that is the next big thing for me is team models that transcend borders in a different way than just a staff augmentation. And it's going to be a challenge for our leaders. Quite honestly. Talk
about that shift, because that one's interesting, right? Like leaders are used to people reporting to them, and that's their way that they can deliver value. And this is a little different, isn't it?
Totally. It's they don't report to you, and their first language may not be the same as yours. And how you get over those hurdles is a challenge. There's no doubt about it. But it can't be a roadblock.
Right.
It is overcomable. We have lots of people that are multilingual. We should be able to let teams deal in their native tongue on things that we then bring together that we can deliver outcomes to whatever language our customers want to work with us in.
Right.
Like that's at the end of the day. So it's certainly that reporting relationship. I hope that in my teams we've gotten over that.
Yeah.
I think we have for the most part, but we haven't embraced the that physical distance.
Right.
COVID changed how we work.
Yeah.
But as we've moved through the last year or so, we're starting to come more into the office. And I'm a firm believer, I'll just say this, I'm a firm believer that you need to be in person together to tackle the really big unknowns.
Right.
It's just way more effective. But you can do it virtually as well.
Right.
You just have to be very conscious of people, especially if it's not their English. In this case, I'll just use English. English isn't their first language.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for them to break into the conversation. If you have 8 people somewhere in Toronto in a room together and they're wherever and it's not their first language, they're not going to break in. They're probably not going to participate. And, from my perspective, we're going to lose the value of the experience and the thoughts that they bring to the table.
Right.
And that would be, we need to overcome that because that's not acceptable in my book.
Yeah.
So that's the next big hurdle. And I know it won't be as easy as just putting them together. Like it's not. Right. So, that's my next big challenge.
What else would you like to share? Any words of advice or wisdom? Any exciting next things? Other than this obviously this next challenge is a good one. So you don't beat me to the punch with that question.
Yeah, I think we haven't talked a lot about mindset. It's been sort of embedded, but you as a leader, you need to resist the temptation to dictate what people do. As a leader, you need to be more of a coach,
right?
A guide. We've been working together a long time. I rely on your team for a lot of technical guidance.
Yeah.
No question about it. But I rely more on it for asking the right kind of questions that are going to get my team thinking.
Right.
And I've built upon that. And that's kind of my operating model now. The less decisions I have to make, the better. Because it means the teams are making the decisions. They're closer to the what. They're closer to the challenges. They're closer to the customer experience. They're talking to the customers. I'm not. So they can make better directional decisions.
Right. Absolutely.
My job is to make sure that they're in a place where they can, a safe spot that they can.
Amazing.
So sometimes I have to bring it out, but that's part of the growth.
Well, that's awesome, Greg. And it's firstly from my end, it's been an awesome experience. Just starting right at the beginning when it's, hey, let's go help Agile, kind of in a closet here on a project, all the way for 2 teams or something, all the way to enabling a 3,000 person organization, give or take. Definitely. We're going to keep a pulse on this journey as it goes, and because I can't wait to see what happens to the rest of the bank as well.
Well, thank you very much for the time, Jeff. It was really enjoyable.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks again for joining me on Whiplash Agile. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single episode. If you want to connect with me, join me on LinkedIn or Twitter/X. And if you like what you hear, or especially if you don't like what you hear, get in touch with me directly at agilebydesign.com.